Finally here, are we now? Yeah, it's been a while since we talked about Dragon Quest II. Like in the review, I guess. Yep, definitely it's been a while. You know what? This game was actually pretty good. Yeah, I shit you not, when it comes down to it, I had a blast playing through Dragon Quest II HD-2D Remake. In many cases, this game is almost a 10 out of 10. I say almost because not all games can be perfect. As definitely they fixed every issue I had with Dragon Quest II. But I guess we might as well step back a bit. If you guys remembered in my original video, I stated that the developers worked on the game right after they were done with Dragon Quest I, as in right before Enix started manufacturing copies of that game. And they were told to get that game out by November, and they had to delay the game a month, only to find out playtesters told them that, hey, this game's too hard, so they had to delay it again, and when they even did release, the game still had issues because people complained about poor balancing, and you guys know already, I basically tore this game apart in my original Dragon Quest II review. I basically complained about the progression, I complained about certain things like finding the Go key in the island that was the size of a testicle, I complained about Canog being a piece of glass, and when you ask, why are you just calling him glass? Isn't that a glass cannon? No, a glass cannon is actually someone who's actually strong, but falls down pretty easily. A piece of glass is someone who just shatters completely because they're weak as because he's clearly a piece of shit. And of course I complain about Grandirect being hell on earth. Those are all complaints I have, and in regards to that original NES release, I still don't regard the NES version of Dragon Quest II a good game. It's clearly a game that has problems, has poor balancing issues, and regarding grinding, it's just not that fun to grind in this game. Because monsters constantly maul your ass, and then when someone's dead, you have to go back and heal them up, and then when you go out, they maul your ass still, and then even if you're full health, they still maul your ass. Yeah, I don't want to go out and spurg out just yet. And even with the remakes coming out and fixing some problems with some quality of life improvements, you guys know already, I still don't think the remakes do anything to fix the problems of Dragon Quest II. Ultimately, what the remakes did was put a band-aid on a gaping wound. And now with HD-2D, they've clearly went out and saw that, yeah, there's a clear gaping wound with Dragon Quest II, we need to go out and stitch this up. But of course, before we dive right in and talk about Dragon Quest II HD-2D Remake, Dragon Quest I and II HD-2D Remake was given to me as a review code from Square Enix. And of course, it's the Switch 2 version, though unlike my Dragon Quest I version where I played two different versions, one on Switch 2 and one on my PC, this one was only on Switch 2. But now we have all that out the way, it's finally time to talk about Dragon Quest II HD-2D Remake, and we start with the plot. After the defeat of the Dragon Lord, the hero set out on a journey to find his own kingdom with Guilin. And he found multiple kingdoms, and having his offspring rule in those kingdoms in his stead. And three kingdoms in particular were formed: Mindenhall, Canog, and Moonbrook. Mindenhall specialized in physical abilities. Canog was more so in the middle, focusing on both physical and magic abilities. And Moonbrook primarily focused on high-end magic abilities. And for about 100 years, peace reigned. Though suddenly, Hargon and his men declared themselves to the world and raid havoc across the land, starting with Moonbrook as they basically decimate the whole area, with only one lone soldier escaping the whole ordeal. But I have to mention this, in the original game, that soldier escaped when Moonbrook was basically being destroyed in the process. But in HD-2D, this person wakes up after the whole kingdom gets destroyed and then heads over to Mindenhall, and upon arriving there, he goes on and dies. I'm pretty sure you're already dead by then. But regardless though, he heads over to Mindenhall, warns the kingdom that there's an all-scale attack over in Moonbrook, but before you can tell who caused the whole thing, he basically dies right then and there. So then you, the Prince of Mindenhall, is tasked to investigate what happened to the kingdom of Moonbrook. And first things first, our hero heads over to the kingdom of Canog to tell them what happened to Moonbrook, and asking for the assistance of his cousin, the Prince of Canog. To which of course the King of Canog tells the Prince of Mindenhall that the Prince of Canog head over to the one cave he normally trains at. And thus, the Prince of Mindenhall heads over, alongside the Princess of Canog as well, as she decides to tag along upon overhearing what happened to Moonbrook. And believing two people are better than one, she comes along with you. Though it doesn't really mean much. Eventually once you get the Prince of Canog, the Princess of Canog is basically scolded by the King of Canog to go back to her room. I get being overprotective, but you can clearly tell that she can hold her own. Though regardless though, the Prince of Mendenhall and Prince of Canuck head down to the Moonbrick region where they find a dog, and also they find the Roz Mirror. And you might be wondering why I'm skipping some things here and there. That's simply because I kind of secrets break this portion right here. But hey, it is what it is. And they use the Roz Mirror on the dog here, and it turns out to be the Princess of Moonbrook. And this is where they find out that the destruction of Moonbrook Castle is caused by Hargon and his men. And upon talking to the Princess of Moonbrook, you can clearly tell she's pretty vengeful right now. And she wants to avenge her men and the people that serve the Kingdom of Moonbrook and make sure Hargon gets his just desserts. And upon sensing this, the Prince of Canuck tells the Prince of Mendenhall that they should treat her like a cousin. Not like soldiers, not like armed men, just like cousins going on a nice little adventure. Because he personally believes there needs to be a little bit of levity involved, just so there's not a lot of rage within the Princess of Moonbrook. And honestly, that's pretty understandable right there. But regardless though, our heroes go on and grab the Windbreaker, head over to the port town of Rippleport, where the people have concerns about the younglings being influenced by wrongful forces, which they are right. There's a nun there that's basically saying nonsense overall, and it turns out they actually serve the kingdom of Hargon. And once you take them down, the people of Rippleport are grateful that they give you their ship, and you're able to sail across the world. And upon heading over to the kingdom of Tanagil, you find out that the Princess of Moonbrook allegedly headed over to the kingdom asking about peculiar questions. And the king of Tanagil is somewhat skeptical about the Princess of Moonbrook being here. Though I have to argue that the Prince of Mendenhall and Canuck are there, so clearly this is the real Princess of Moonbrook right here. And the other one was a pure fake. I get the fake had the pendant and all, but come on, there's two other princes right there. Though regardless though, our heroes eventually head down to the Dragon Lord's castle and meet up with the Dragon Lord's great-great-great-grandson. Though I'm pretty sure I put one extra great in there. And he tells them in order to go out and defeat Hargon, they must find the 5 sigils scattered across the land of the world, and also help the fairies as well, as they're also being attacked by Hargon as well. And upon heading there and taking down one of the henchmen there, they tell them about the sigils and they give them the fairy flute, and thus our heroes began exploring around the world for these sigils, though in a quick stop to Baron, a monster attacks there, and upon defeating that monster, the Prince of Canuck gets Joey Wheelered by this monster and ends up bedridden. And upon heading back to Canuck and telling the mom and dad that the Prince of Canuck is now bedridden, the Princess of Canuck heads out to find the one thing that could heal up the Prince of Canuck, being the Yggdrasil leaf. And thus, the Prince of Mendenhall and the Princess of Moonbrook accompany the Princess of Canuck over to the World Tree to find one Yggdrasil leaf. And upon retrieving the leaf and returning back to Baron, they mash up the leaf like it's a tea leaf in a sense, and feed it to the Prince of Canuck, and he's back to his good old self. And thus it's ultimately decided the Princess of Canuck joins our heroes in finding the 5 sigils and defeating Hargon. And we're going to put a stop right there in the story, because I want to save some of these story plots for the spoiler section. Obviously, when you break this down and summarize the whole thing, it's still ultimately Hargon does bad things, we must stop Hargon, and we must get these 5 little MacGuffins across the world. But definitely a lot more things, a lot more details were added into the story to flesh it out a bit more. And I have to say, they definitely put a lot more characters to the main heroes. Of course, aside from the Prince of Mendenhall, because he's a silent protag. The Prince of Canuck is definitely the adventurous kind of character who wants to go on an adventure and believes everything's all hunky-dory like a fairy tale. And I have to say, he's quite the bro. He wants to make sure that everyone's happy throughout the whole adventure, everyone's being taken care of, and of course, sensing the Princess of Moonbrook's rage for revenge, he wants to make sure that the Princess of Moonbrook is taken care of quite well. And that's respectable right there. At the end of the day, they're cousins. They should look out for one another, even though they're not siblings. They should still care. And like I mentioned before, the Princess of Moonbrook is a relatively essential character when you meet her and turn her back from a dog. And it does make sense, the Kingdom of Moonbrook was ravaged by Hargon and his men. And what happened to her being turned into a dog, yeah, it does make sense to why she will want revenge against the person that wronged her. Though of course at the same time, it's about the lesson of you don't want to carry darkness in your heart and demanding revenge, and demanding those who wronged you be suffered in the nth degree. Because at the end of the day, she still needs to be in essence with her humanity. And overall, throughout the adventure, she eventually starts bawling down, she starts crying, and ultimately she starts realizing that it's not just about avenging those that wrong you, it's once again understanding that you need to maintain your humanity. As one example I want to give is in Burswell, where you head over there, where you essentially meet a group of people who live in an underground town, and you essentially find out these people used to be a part of Renderek and then had to escape because of Hargon doing his little business there, and found refuge in an underground town. And when the whole decision of whether or not they should just go on and kill Hargon soldiers, or at least negotiate at the very least, the Princess of Moonbrook stands on the side of killing them just in cold blood, while the Prince of Canuck sees the idea of that anyone can be negotiated with, and you should at least negotiate first before you go on throw out bloodshed. And in a way, both the Prince of Canuck and the Princess of Moonbrook are right, because the Succubus is not willing to negotiate, and once you take her down, you find out the little black creature just doesn't want to fight at all and begs for mercy. And initially, the Princess of Moonbrook wants to go out and kill this little creature, but the Prince of Canuck steps in and basically says he did nothing wrong, he could be forgiven, and yes, it's wrong that he knew about the attack of Moonbrook and did nothing in regard to stopping the whole attack. But at the end of the day, people must be forgiven, people must let go of their anger, and see things more clearly. And by the end of it, the little creature ends up being their friend, as he actually goes on and investigates the whereabouts of Renderek and how to get over to Renderek. And to his dying breath, because eventually when you find the location where Renderek is, you find him down on the ground, basically on the brink of death. And he thanks you guys for basically forgiving him and giving him this opportunity to do something right. But of course, the main lesson that the Princess of Moonbrook learns here is maintain your humanity and see the forest for the trees. And quickly talking about the Princess of Canuck, she's definitely the more little sister archetype when it comes down to it. But she's still a fun character overall, even though her character type is a little bit more on the generic side. And overall, I find these versions of the heroes in Dragon Quest II be a lot more emotional. They'll cry at times when they beat monsters. They'll leave us joy whenever they're victorious. Or they'll feel sad when an emotional scene is happening. You can clearly tell they're definitely a lot more emotional in comparison to many other party members. And I think at the end of the day, it does make sense. At the end of the day, these are people who live through peace. They're not expected to deal with the hardship of a villain that's trying to take over the world or destroy the world into smithereens. So it does make sense for them to feel emotional at times. Not truly understand the stakes that are involved, in some cases like the Prince of Canuck, not understanding that maybe it does make sense to take care of a villain. Or in the case of the Princess of Moonbrook, have some humanity when it comes down to fighting what you're fighting for. Though on the other end of the spectrum, Hargon and his men are a lot more organized and thought out when it comes down to how they plan to take over the world and destroy it. As Atlas is responsible for finding Rubis, Pazuzu is more responsible for guarding the false idol, and Belial, okay, whatever Belial, is responsible for finding the sigils. And these guys have their henchmen to make sure that they get the job done. So Hargon is victorious in his journey, even though our heroes constantly intercept them throughout the whole journey. And there's one brand new henchwoman that serves Hargon called Mariella. And honestly, she's a thought. Yeah, I'm not gonna mince words right here. She is horrid every time she pops up. Every time I see her and the way she talks, especially in the Japanese version, she screams that thought energy right there. And anytime I'm just like, can we just be done with the thought right here? Be gone. Just be gone. Though I guess since I mentioned voice acting, might as well talk about that voice acting. As of course in Japanese, it's what you expect for Dragon Quest in Japanese. And for English, it's the typical British acting. Though this time around, it does seem like less characters are speaking those thees and thous, so if you were getting tired of them saying thou must or have at thee, then you should be glad that they definitely toned it down here in 2 HD-2D. Though once again, the same problem as 1 persists, to where not all cutscenes are voiced. I would say about 40% is, which is quite disappointing because whether you play in Japanese or English, it's all great. And one shout out for the Japanese voiceovers, shout out to Jun Fukuyama as the Prince of Canuck. He definitely pours his heart out as the Prince of Canuck, and he definitely delivers a fantastic performance. And also aside from the main story, once again, much like Dragon Quest I HD-2D, each town has a little story to tell. For example, as we mentioned before in Rebelport, the people there are concerned about the younglings being convinced by wrongdoers, and we already mentioned Burleswell's story, and also there's the town of Suez, the place where you get the flowing dress. to where in that location, everyone there has reduced down to a childlike state, and when you head over to the Moon Tower, you find out that a group of monsters are basically reverting these people's minds to think like children. And this is the case for almost any town you go to in the land of Dragon Quest II. And for me, I'm quite happy that they've made these additions here, because the one thing I've always liked about future Dragon Quest titles is the smaller stories to tell throughout each location you go to. But moving on, let's talk about the graphics, and once again, same graphical presentation as Dragon Quest I HD-2D Remake, beautiful HD-2D graphics, and of course for the music, we now have orchestrated music from the Tokyo Metropolitan Symphony. Though unlike Dragon Quest I HD-2D, I don't think the music here is as dull in comparison. I do think Koichi Sugiyama has definitely composed much better music this time around that you can actually listen to for hours upon hours. As I don't get tired from the battle theme, I love both the first overworld theme and the second overworld theme, and the ship theme is just fantastic in my opinion. Now let's move on to gameplay changes, starting with the party members, and man, there's definitely a glow up here. Probably the least of them is the Prince of Mendenhall, as he's still our good old physical boy here, but definitely because of the fact that he can't use magic spells. The only thing that is improved upon the Prince of Mendenhall is the fact he now can use abilities. Though I think overall when it comes down to what he can use, it's relatively decent, and you're worried about some healing spells, he does know meditation down the line, and he also knows Miracle Slash. And then moving on, we have the Princess of Moonbrook. And once again, another great glow up right here. Because of the fact that she got turned into a dog, she actually knows some nose-based abilities like Nose for Treasure, which I think is quite funny, and certain abilities that a dog would know, which once again I find quite funny. Though when it comes down to her magic spells, she has greatly expanded. She now knows the Crack family of spells, and when it comes down to healing abilities, she still eventually learns Multi-Heal, but she also now learns Gazine, which was something she couldn't learn in the past releases, only the Prince of Cannock could. But overall, greatly improved. And then we have the brand new party member, the Princess of Cannock. And when it comes down to it, I heard people who had hands-on with this game said that she was the more so jester class of the whole crew. And at first I didn't really know what they meant when I played the demo initially, but then when I got the chance to play the game myself, fully, I understood what they meant. At times she'll ignore your commands and do some random stuff, hell even debuff you as well. And when I decided to give some Seed of Lux to some people, I just immediately noticed that she had high luck, much like a Jester. Though unlike a Jester, she actually knows some pretty useful spells. She knows the Boom family of spells, she knows the Crack family of spells, she knows the Frizz family of spells, and she knows some healing abilities here and there, but ultimately I found them to be not that useful because she only knows heal and re-heal for a good while until she learns multi-heal. Though what I use her most for is support because she knows the ability called Aegon, and of course, as you know already, it stacks on your physical abilities. So anytime I'm dealing with bosses, I have her Aegon and have the Prince of Mendenhall deal the heavy hits. And I think that's everyone right there. I think we're done talking about all the party members. Yep. Yeah, I know, I kid. We might as well talk about the Prince of Cannock because holy f***, did they give some steroids over to the Prince of Cannock, because this man is now cracked. And I say so because he now knows the Crack family spells, but also the fact that he now knows the Sap family spells, he knows Giga Slash, he knows all the crazy abilities like Flame Slash, Dragon Slash. That's insane right there. So yeah, this guy has finally upgraded from being a piece of glass to a glass cannon. Because at times he definitely does fall relatively easily, though if you know what you're doing, what setups you have, it's a lot easier to give him equipment just so he doesn't fall like a piece of glass. So those are our party members right there, and also I did mention there are scrolls throughout the adventure much like Dragon Quest I HD-2D. I kinda forgot to mention this in my review of Dragon Quest I HD-2D, though it is what it is. But much like that game, you'll find scrolls throughout the world, and you can teach it to some people to learn brand new abilities, whether it's brand new spells, or just abilities in general. And honestly, throughout your adventure, you'll basically have enough scrolls for everyone to learn all their abilities, because some of them will learn the same ability, and it's just a matter of who you want to learn that ability first. And of course, we have brand new locations to explore, much like Dragon Quest I HD-2D. For example, in the land of Alfgard, all the towns now appear this time around, from Rimildar, Cantlin, Damdara, even though it's still ravaged, Galenholm, you name it. And of course, we have some brand new locales and dungeons to explore, like the Fairy Palace. The whole Idrisol area now has a brand new dungeon to go out and explore. And of course, we have the brand new underwater section. Somewhere in the middle of the game, you'll meet a group of mermaids, and later down the line, when you head over to the fairy palace, you're given the harp that allows you to go underwater. And yeah, this definitely adds a lot more to the adventure, as there's brand new dungeons to explore underwater, and you can also get goodies in these little areas that are eerily similar to a game in the 6th entry of a long-running franchise. Is that a foreshadowing to what's to come? Maybe. I really don't know. And speaking of rewards, the top of the game is back here in the HD-2D remake, though reworked a bit. Before, you had to do this kind of slot machines here, but because it's a somewhat slot machines, and I know some countries are a lot more regulatory when it comes down to gambling, they reworked it to be more in line to something that you see in Japanese convenience stores with third lotteries, where you spin the wheel and whatever comes out, you get your little reward. And honestly, I find this a lot more helpful because, hey, this is at least pure chance here in comparison to just pressing buttons and hoping that you get a straight line. And once again, much like last time, sigils now have more function than just being a MacGuffin. And they all have the same abilities like they did in Dragon Quest I. So if you know how those worked in Dragon Quest I, they'll work the same here in Dragon Quest II. And there's even more MacGuffins to go out and collect, because eventually down the line, we have to go out and collect memories. As these are things that are scattered across the land, living memories, where it essentially is telling the whole history of the land of Alfgard, how Erdrick fell down to the world, and the hero from Dragon Quest I, essentially retelling those events, which is pretty interesting. And some of them are gated behind bosses, which are pretty hard as hell, though we'll talk more about that a little later. Though having these are a little bit nice, and I guess because they added in more things like the underwater section, it kind of makes sense to have more things to collect than just the sigils. And speaking of the sigils, they actually did improve on how you collect these goddamn things. Because you know, before I complained of the fact that collecting these sigils was just annoying as hell because there was barely any NPCs that told you where to find these sigils, and they were just in the most out of nowhere locations. For example, the sun sigil and a shrine just in this one little area right here. Nothing tells you it's there, it's just there. And while remakes do improve on this and actually fix the problem by giving a little glowy spot of where the sigil is, once again, just putting band-aids over a gaping wound. Or how about the Echo Flute? Remember that right there? Where you have to go to the middle of the ocean just to find the Echo Flute? And even then it's barely that useful? Well, this time around in Dragon Quest II HD-2D, remember when I mentioned that you have to go out and help the fairies over in the Shrine of Rain? That is where you get the Echo Flute. And clearly, this is what you should do right here. Give it a clear location of where this damn thing is, instead of putting it in the middle of the ocean. How about that? And you might be wondering, why in the hell am I censoring all the and shits and dicks and what have you?
Nostalgia.
But anyways, let's move on, because one thing they actually fixed in Dragon Quest II HD-2D Remake is the balance of the game. Because they actually did it. They actually went out and fixed Dragon Quest II. There's barely any moment where any normal monster will go out their way and maul your fucking ass. And hell, one of the normal enemies that was known to maul your fucking ass, the Saber Cats, yeah, they're no longer a normal enemy in this game. They're now just a boss in Dirkrander. And yeah, they still maul your fucking ass, but hey, at least it's a fucking boss. I don't really have a problem if a boss mauls my fucking ass, because it's supposed to be the hardest thing out there. And because of the fact that most characters are now buffed, it's just a lot more enjoyable to actually play through Dragon Quest II. Because this was clearly the main problem that Dragon Quest II had, where monsters just came out and they were and mauled your ass, and when it came down to actually grinding, it was just not fun, because one of the party members might fall down just out of nowhere, and you have to go back and heal them up, and then you have to go out, and they'll maul your ass again, and then you have to go back, and then you have to go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and you don't want to deal with that shit. And if you want to enjoy this game, you cheat. Because at least that makes it a little bit more enjoyable, at least a little bit more bearable. But even then, you still have mauling people at full health. But that's not to say that Dragon Quest II has that problem, because it clearly really doesn't. And the only time that monsters will maul your ass is you run out of MP. It is definitely a lot easier this time around to run out of MP, and you're still in the middle of the dungeon, and you still want to progress a little bit more. And yeah, that's really when monsters will go out and beat your ass. But even then, it doesn't really matter, because evacuating is relatively easy to do, and zooming out a dungeon into a town is pretty easy because you don't bonk your head anymore. And also, if you want to go out and find an easy place to go out and grind, there's some pretty good locations. For example, there's Slime Island, and also there's this one island right here discovered by my good old pal Dookie. I didn't do it in my playthrough because, honestly, I didn't know this existed right here. But even then, I would say, when it comes down to it, the developers kind of wanted to be a bit of dicks when it comes down to it. Because the one thing I haven't mentioned yet is the key system, because once again they did change the key system from Thief Key, Magic Key to Ultimate Key, where before it was just Silver Key, Gold Key, and Thief Key. And they changed where these locations are for these keys, because before it was the Silver Key, you find it in the Cave of Lakes, the Gold Key was in that island where it was the size of a testicle, and the Thief Key was over in Burrowswell. Well, this time around, they changed it all. Because with the Thief Key, you head back to Moonbrook's castle to where the Princess of Moonbrook investigates her pendant, and some soldiers that actually survive the attack gives you a Thief Key, and the Magic Key is now in the underwater section, which is about halfway through, which is about 17 hours. When it comes down to the Ultimate Key, you don't get that until Renderek's Shrine. Yeah, the final area in the game. Why? Why would you do this? Why would you put the last key at the final area? And I wouldn't be complaining about this because throughout the whole adventure, there's gonna be areas where you need the Ultimate Key to unlock a chest, unlock a door, unlock anything, and they just said, yeah, we're gonna put this at the end of the game. That is just some narcissist bullshit right there. And it does affect a lot of the balancing throughout the game because Erdrick's shield, Erdrick's armor, Erdrick's helmet, Erdrick's pendant, all locked behind Ultimate Keys. Why? Just why? Why can't I just have things right then and there? But no, we can't have nice things. But anyways, let's talk about bosses, because much like Dragon Quest I HD-2D, we have more bosses, and I did kind of allude to the fact that there are more bosses throughout this adventure. And as someone who's played on Draconian mode throughout this whole adventure, and I have the same critiques as Dragon Quest I and Dragon Quest III, where it's more so thinking a couple steps ahead and understanding boss patterns and the such, though less so in Dragon Quest II because you now have 4 party members. These bosses are relatively challenging in my opinion. I definitely died a lot thanks to bosses more so than anything. And I think ultimately it's more so because of the fact that I'm not really thinking about how to change up my strategies, I'm just thinking about what's the quickest way to deal with X, Y, or Z, without really fully thinking about what these people are highly affected by. And yeah, unlike before, I only played this in Draconian mode, so I really only have experience with Draconian mode, though I would assume, much like 1 HD-2D remake, Dragon Quest mode is a lot more easier, so have at it. But also for the fun of it, we might as well talk about some of the bosses in this game, because some of them did surprise me. For example, Dirtrander, you still fight that Saber Cat, but eventually down the line, you fight the king himself, and holy is this dude a beefcake. And he definitely flexes his muscles because that dude hits like a tank. And also, like I mentioned before, there's those underground bosses that you go on and face to get those memories, and some of them are annoying and some of them are definitely challenging. And yes, throughout the adventure, you fight the top brass of Hargon's army. Of course, being Belial, Pazuzu, and Atlas, and these guys are definitely tough anytime you go on and face them, and they do change up the music anytime these guys pop their ugly mugs. Though I think it's finally time for us to move on to the spoiler section, and of course, if you do not want to be spoiled, click to this section right here. So let's first talk about Renderek, because yeah, this is actually a lot more easier now, and I think that's simply because the Prince of Canuck is just cracked overall. And honestly, because of the rebalancing, all the monsters that appear in Renderek, they're basically cakewalks. Yeah, they hit hard, but they're still pretty easy to deal with. But anyways, let's actually talk about Renderek, because Renderek has actually been fleshed out a bit more. Rather than being the place where Hargon resides, it was actually once a kingdom, ruled by a prince and all. But when Hargon came in and took over Renderek, they actually went out and fled the area, and all the men that actually helped serve the prince all died throughout the journey. And the prince became a priest in the town of Baron. And he warns you about this tumultuous journey that you'll have to deal with when heading over to Renderek, but he trusts you guys as the sign of Erdrick to make sure that you indeed take down Hargon. And upon heading over to Renderek through the cave, you actually run into Belial. And he actually gives you an offer to work with him to defeat Hargon because he's just getting sick and tired of working with Hargon and getting tired of Hargon barking marching orders to him. But ultimately you refuse because your goals are different from Belial. As simply, Belial just wants to be free because he doesn't want to hear from Hargon anymore, but he still wants to wreak havoc, while you guys want to get rid of Hargon because you want to bring peace to the world. Yeah, not a crazy concept right there. So anyways, Belial basically says, you guys are making a grave mistake and leaves, and you guys head over to Renderek and the Hall of Hargon. And once again, much like before, an illusion appears, but thanks to the Eye of Rubis, you basically go out and prevent the whole illusion from happening. And this is where you find out the person who created the whole illusion was Mariella. And suddenly that whole illusion sucks now, because it's created by a thought. But anyways, after beating Mariella, The whole secret defense happens as before. You first take down Atlas, then Pazuzu, and then Belial, and then ultimately Hargon. And much like before, Hargon's a bitch. Though I can't really say entirely he's a bitch, because there's a set of 3 new bosses in Dragon Quest II HD-2D Remake, and they are hard as hell to deal with. And I had to grind a couple of times just to take them down, and when I went over the Hall of Hargon and took down Mariella, Pazuzu, Atlas, and Belial, they fell down pretty easily, though I'm pretty sure that's because I overgrinded, and I'm pretty sure I overgrinded on Hargon as well, just because I took care of these 3 right here. Yeah, Hargon, these guys are the true villains right here. And the same thing goes with Malroth. He's still a bitch. The same strategy of casapping him and buffing yourselves up still works. And of course, because of the fact that we have brand new abilities from Aegon and Oomph, yeah, you know where I'm going with this. Aegon, Prince of Mendenhall, Oomph him, do some crazy attack, and down Malroth goes, though he does have full heal. Bitch. And the day is saved, and you basically tell everyone that you've defeated Hargon. Everyone celebrates, and you go to different towns, and unfortunately some people die, while people still celebrate. And at the end of it, when meeting with the King of Mendenhall, he rewards you to become the next King of Mendenhall, and everyone celebrates. Ending Dragon Quest II HD-2D Remake, or really? Yeah, of course I'm gonna mention this. There's indeed post-game content in Dragon Quest II HD-2D Remake, as there's a voice that sounds eerily similar to Calasmos in Japanese, basically saying it's not over yet, and the great-great-grandson of the Dragon Lord basically sensing this evil. So let's talk about the post-game content, starting with number 1, the Cloudgate Citadel. Yes, in Dragon Quest III, this makes a comeback here, and when you reach to the top of the Cloudgate Citadel, you have a fight against Shenlong. And much like before, you have to beat him in 35 turns, and then 25 turns, and then 15 turns for any time you go out and reface him, and anytime you beat him under those turns, he'll grant you a wish. And ultimately I only did it once because quite honestly the rewards here aren't that enticing to do multiple times, and quite honestly I didn't really want to relearn a brand new boss pattern for Shenlong. And then when you head over to the Fairy Palace and talk to the fairies, they sense that something's opened up, and turns out it's the Cave of Dwarves. And upon heading there, you meet one of the dwarves and they say, "Oh, the time's come, you see us now." And you enter into a new place called the Cave of Confusion. Basically, it's just a gauntlet of different locations in Dragon Quest II, and you have to make sure you find the right place to exit. Because if you don't, you basically loop through that same area again, and you basically deal with the most strongest enemies in the whole game. So yeah, by all means, it's a gauntlet. Though your reward by going through this whole gauntlet is the Sphere of Light. And upon getting the Sphere of Light, you head over down to the Dragon Lord's castle, and the Dragon Lord basically says, "Yeah, this is what I need right here to regain my powers." And he tells you to come back later as he wants you to go out and rebuild Erdrick's sword. Because I didn't mention this in my story synopsis or in my gameplay synopsis, because early on the Dragon Lord does give you Erdrick's sword, but it's all rusted and all. But now with the new evil looming around, he tells us to go out and rebuild Erdrick's sword. So we do, and Erdrick's sword is reborn, even more stronger, and then it leads into a battle between us and the Dragon Lord. And the Dragon Lord's a lot more stronger in his second form, simply because he knows an ability that knows out any buffs. So that's fun right there, and that was definitely the longest battle in this game that I've dealt with so far, because I was just determined to make sure I win this in one go. But after defeating the Dragon Lord great-great-grandson, he basically determines you guys are good to go to take on the evil that he senses. And it's all just a matter of heading back to the Hall of Hargon and dealing with Hargon again and Malroth, and then the new evil pops up. He basically cracks the hole open and sucks our heroes in to a weird-looking dimension, as basically the evil is basically just pure f***ing darkness. And when all hope is lost, suddenly Ramia pops out of nowhere and basically helps us to deal with this evil, and using the powers of Erdrick's sword, we're able to null out this guy, and turns out this evil form is known as Malroth. And in a much similar cadence to another game in the 8th entry in the franchise, you go on and face Malroth on top of Ramia. And honestly, unlike Malroth, this guy is not a bitch. He definitely pulls no punches. He knows a lot of abilities that can you pretty easily. And I actually did die on my first go around, and on my second go, I was a little bit more smarter on what abilities I wanted to utilize, what spells that I really didn't need to use, so on and so forth, and how to utilize characters like the Prince of Mendenhall, the Prince of Cannock, so on and so forth. It still wasn't easy, but man, was it actually pretty fun to deal with this version called Malroth. And after Malroth gets his just desserts, you actually see a vision of how Hargon became evil. After the Dragon Queen died in Dragon Quest III, Hargon kind of lost his purpose a bit. And then later that allowed the darkness to consume him, and because of the darkness consuming him, his anger towards Erdrick just fuels even more, which is why he went out and manipulated the egg to become the Dragon Lord. And why towards the end of it he wants to go on and recreate the world. If you notice in some cutscenes, he mentions he wants to create a world with him and her. He basically meant him and the Dragon Queen. So yeah, basically when it comes down to it, Hargon was never evil to begin with, he just got consumed by darkness. But once again, the day is saved and our heroes go back to Mendenhall, and the King of Mendenhall tells you that you're the King of Mendenhall now. But after all the celebrations and the credits roll, the Prince of Cannock, the Princess of Moonbrook, and the Princess of Cannock want to go on more journeys, but unfortunately it sucks that the Prince of Mendenhall can't come along with them. And on the next day, the former King of Mendenhall decides to become the King of Mendenhall again because he felt like he's stopping you from experiencing a journey that you want to go on and experience. And thus, the Princess of Mendenhall, the Prince of Cannock, the Princess of Cannock, and the Princess of Moonbrook all go on a journey with Ramia, as Ramia takes them back to Alien, the hometown of Erdrick. And upon exploring this town, this is where you find out that people go to this town to celebrate the hero that defeated Baramos. And upon meeting with the kingdom of Alienhand, this is where the kingdom finds out that you guys are descendants of that hero that defeated Baramos and Zoma. And they decide to let you go over to the house to where Erdrick first lived. And when they enter in, the mother recognizes them as children of Erdrick, and she hugs them and says, "Welcome back," ending Dragon Quest II. And honestly, I'm just shocked that this even happened. And one thing I forgot to mention is that when you go on and talk to people around the world, Rubus mentions that Ramia has the ability to go back in time and go in between dimensions. To which I have to say, did we go back in time to where people still celebrated Erdrick as a hero for defeating Soma and Baramos? And everyone that's still there is there? I honestly don't know, because Erdrick's mother recognizes them as her own children. Honestly, I don't even know how to comprehend this right here, it's insane. And definitely I still have a lot of questions to ask. But I think it's time for us to finally wrap things up. I can't believe it when it comes down to it. Dragon Quest II, a game that I didn't like, is now a game I absolutely adore. I love what they've done with the Prince of Cannock, the Princess of Moonbrook, the Princess of Cannock, and how they chose to expand on the story of Dragon Quest II. Make it more fleshed out, make it more of an experience to enjoy. And especially after I beat this game and delves all the post-game credit stuff and the post-game stuff, I love this game even more. It's definitely a special game overall, and definitely builds a knot to the whole Erdrick trilogy from Dragon Quest III to 1 to 2. And when it comes down to gameplay, they have fixed all the problems that I had with Dragon Quest II. From the balancing, from your party members, from the exploration, from the sigils. They fixed it all, even though some things are still a little annoying. Like, obviously there are some times where I constantly died at times, but hey, it was against a boss. It's expected to deal some hardship against a boss. And when it comes down to it, I would recommend playing Dragon Quest II HD-2D Remake. And maybe in some cases, Dragon Quest II HD-2D Remake might be the only way you should play Dragon Quest II. Because realistically, when it comes down to it, I understand some people are fans of the original NES release. What reason is there to replay Dragon Quest II other than experiencing a game that's hard as balls, that's unbalanced, unfair at times, and in some cases, makes you want to pull your hair out? Because certainly, I'm not going to go back to the original Dragon Quest II on NES. Maybe I go back to the remakes just to re-experience it in a somewhat okay way, even though there's still gaping wounds in that version. And obviously this might be controversial when it comes down to it, but that's how I feel personally. They fixed Dragon Quest II, and now it's one of my favorite Dragon Quest games out there. If we were to rank it somewhere, probably behind Dragon Quest V and Dragon Quest VIII, but definitely in the S tier. It's amazing of how they were able to fix a game that I just didn't like and make it to a game that I adore. Well, definitely a happy ending for Dragon Quest II. It finally has a good version of the game. So next time we meet, we're finally taking a look at Dragon Quest IV. Wait a minute, what the fuck's over there? Dragon Quest Caravan Hearts? Wait a minute, what the fuck's in here? What the fuck?